But of the tools out there, and about 6, 7, 8, scan is the worst. All the other tools work. All the verbal tools work, and they really are above the level of challenge for lie telling and truth telling. The scan, nobody found anything.
We are back with
Yes, good.
Aldert Vrij.
Yeah, good.
Did I
good,
get
good,
it?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, it's been 3 years, and in this time since I last saw you, I figured out how to
Excellent.
say your name. It's awesome to have you back. I'm looking forward to it. You have a new paper that's come out relatively recently, and I would like to continue our discussion because you research all kinds of deception. And I realized in the last interview I had with you, I don't think I asked you the most obvious question of all. And that is, why are you studying deception? What brought you into this field?
Well, that's in itself a long story, but I started with looking at nonverbal behaviors, and mainly to figure out why black citizens, I'm from the Netherlands, why black citizens are more often stopped by the police and searched. And our thoughts were that could be caused by the fact that black people show different behaviors than Caucasian people do. Many different cultures show different behaviors. And the behaviors that are unexpected, these are behaviors from other cultures than your own culture, they look suspicious. And that's indeed what we found. So we had simulated police interviews, and we found differences in how the white and the black Dutch people behaved in those police interviews. For example, black people looked more away from the conversation partner. That's a very common finding. Made more movements, stuttered more. So now we know that behavior, because it's different from what you're used to, is seen as suspicious.
Mhm.
But then the question, of course, is how do liars actually respond? How do they behave? And what do they say? So then I started with nonverbal deception, nonverbal cues to deception. But we didn't find much. Research doesn't show much in nonverbal cues. And not only we, but many others didn't find much. And then verbal cues emerged, and they do more. They are more diagnostic. So then we made the step from non-verbal cues to verbal cues. And that
Okay, to step back a little bit, um, you were in Netherlands, I guess, when you were doing your initial research, and now you're in England. I'm in the United States. Are there cultural considerations, as in, do black citizens in Netherlands act different than black citizens in England versus black citizens in the United States? And did you run any kind of comparison between these Western
no, we
cultures?
didn't run comparisons, but we know from literature that there are similarities. The white Caucasian people, in the Western world at least, they show similar type of behaviors, similar type of expectancies. And for example, that gaze aversion, black people look more away, that's also found in the US.
Other cultures I feel like could be involved, like the Caribbean culture is probably different than Southern black culture, who have been here for many generations,
Yeah. I
etc.
guess, but there's no research on that. Then the longer you are in a culture, the more you're going to behave like people in the culture do. That's a reasonable expectation. There's, as far as I know, no research in that. But I would think that's the case, yes.
Okay, and so then you said you start to look for nonverbal stuff. Now, what was that about? How did it switch to deception? Because you were talking about just, hey, they don't get along very well. The cops have problems in communicating. What made you say, well, let's look into whether there's truthfulness or not versus just attitude, if that makes sense, or the question
So
makes
we
sense.
know now how what behaviors look suspicious, but that doesn't show yet that you know how liars actually behave. So that's the next step. How do lie tellers behave? So that's what we examined then for about a decade, I think. But we didn't find much. We found differences, but they're very tiny, they're very small. And that's exactly what other people also found. So then you have a meta-analysis came out. A meta-analysis is a summary of all available research in the area. That's called the meta-analysis. And they are
Right.
very useful. They're far more useful than individual studies, because individual studies can go all over the place. But the meta-analysis really summarizes what the common findings are. And they also showed, that one also showed, that the non-verbal cues are pretty weak and unreliable. And that there are three ways, for example, that we know, that also from the meta-analyses, is if you ask people to watch a videotape and then let them decide people are lying or not, versus if people read the transcript. They are more accurate via transcripts than they are by looking at videos.
Okay. I think there's also well, this is a single study and not a meta analysis, but I think there was a study done that the more people watch Lie to Me and other programs
Yeah.
about body language, the worse they performed in determining whether somebody was lying or not. I don't remember the exact study, but I believe there was one that did that.
I don't know which study that is, but lie to me is related to the micro expressions of emotions, the poor. And there's indeed an experiment showing that it didn't work. So people were or not trained in those micro expressions, and it didn't make any difference in how good they were at lie detection after that.
It's odd though, because there are some elements that I do think people do emit
Yeah.
emotions. Is the problem that you can't find a consistent example of it? I'm trying to get a baseline, because there are certain things where you're like, okay, this person looks like they're going to attack me. I'm going to cross the street, or
Yeah.
they look dangerous, and I think that that's a legitimate thing. So how do you
Talking about emotions, for example,
differentiate?
that's indeed the idea that in police suspect interviews, the lie tellers would be more nervous than the truth tellers. That's not necessarily the case. Truth tellers can also be very nervous. Certainly, if you are under suspicion of something, the police suspect you of wrongdoing, you are innocent. You know the police are making a mistake, but you can't demonstrate your innocence. Well, that's a nerve-wracking situation. So indeed, how it usually is, if the stakes get higher, if the consequences get more serious, you will get more cues to the seat. But the problem is that also truth tellers will then also get more nervous. And it's the difference between the lie tellers and the truth tellers in low stake and high stake situations are the same. There's a meta analysis on that.
Really, how would you determine that? Because that is a question that's come up, like, one, when doing different studies. I guess first off, when you're doing the different studies or getting the analysis, whom are you studying? Are these, college grad students that are getting beer money? Or are they criminals? Are they
Most,
normal people? Like,
yeah,
who,
they
who
are
are the
not
subjects?
always, but mostly students, college students. Uh, there are some field studies. So field studies is with real in real interviews. There are not many of them. The problem of them is you need the so-called ground truth. You need to know for certain the person is telling the truth or the person is lying. And the ground truth is very hard to establish in real life situations. And that's why they rarely examined. There are cases, there are certainly studies in there, but the vast majority are students. But the few studies that are there give you very similar findings between students and more serious cases. And the reason for that is that very often the same processes occur, the same strategies are used by lie tellers and truth tellers in lab-based studies or in real life.
I'd be curious though, especially since you have some people who, well, they've got time on their hands and they're easily traceable. Have you run these studies on criminals? And I mean specifically
Mm,
convicted felons, especially those who had some degree of deceit or dishonesty within
yeah.
their crimes. Would they not be good subjects to try to ascertain this? Because their skill level, I would think, may be higher. It may
Yeah.
not. They got caught, but I don't
We
know.
have one study that is very rare. We have a study published in 2002 with real suspects in the UK, suspects in police interviews, suspected of rape, murder, and arson. So these are serious cases. And we looked at some behaviors like gaze aversion, for example, and we found nothing. In lab-based studies, you find nothing. We found nothing either. What we typically found in our own studies with lab-based studies is that line tellers make fewer movements. Certainly, if they don't move their arms, fewer movements with the fingers. And we found exactly the same in these real life interviews, exactly the same findings. So it's because the same processes are going on. These behaviors we found in lab often have to do with hard thinking. When people, liars usually have to think harder. When people lie more than when they tell the truth. And that results in certain behaviors. For example, that leads to fewer movements. When people think harder, they move less. The reason for that is that they have to think what they're going to say. And all the energy goes to the brain and not so much anymore to the behaviors. There's a very easy way to demonstrate that for people at home. What you need to do is ask somebody to say the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, and then also clapping and that kind of thing, walking, make many movements, and then do the other way around. So start at the end.
It sounds like a DUI test.
So that thinking hard is also in police interviews. When people lie, they think harder and tell the truth. So the same processes are going on. So it's not surprising that you find that you get the same findings, but the difference are very, very small. That's the problem. It's so small. You have you can have a difference, a real difference between lie tellers and truth tellers. But the next question is that now big enough to really to see with the naked eye? And that's where the problem often is. That, for example, for non-verbal cues to deception, we know that's usually you have so-called effect sizes that shows what it is. Effect size of about 0.2, statistical value 0.2, is typically a real difference, but too small to see with with the naked eye. It's the same 0.2, the difference in height between people, girls who are 15 or 16-year-old, at least in the US. There are 16-year-old girls are taller, but the difference is very small, and you make many mistakes. So if you now, based on the height, will say the girl is 15 or 16, you make many, many mistakes. And that is 0.2. And nonverbal behavior doesn't get any further than that. So the cues are just not there. There may be a difference, but very, very small. And what you will see is people who promote nonverbal lie detection, what they very often do, it's very often hindsight. And they often don't predict beforehand, okay, show me a videotape, that's what I'm going to look for. It's always the other way around. So they look at the videotape and then will say, well, you could see it there. And that, of course, it is difficult. If different people will show different cues at different moments, yeah, you can't predict anything. And you can't, and how can you train people? How can you teach people? And of course, if you have that kind of material, the difference will be very small, if present at all.
So you're saying, just so I get it right, that they may suffer from confirmation bias.
Well, maybe not. Yeah, that as well. Of course, you look for certain the cues you like, you will start looking for those. That's also true, but that's a different issue. But
okay.
but for example, in some verbal lie detection research, not all, but some of these tools do, is they look always at the same number of cues. One complicated one, there are 18 different verbal criteria they look for, all 18, all the time. And then you see how you get a score of those 18, and you can make a score for that. And based on that, you can tell in reasonable accurate whether people are lying and telling the truth. But the non-verbal stuff doesn't work like that. It's not that they have a checklist and say, let's look for those 10 behaviors and let's get a score and then see he's lying or not. They don't do that.
Well, there actually is one out there, but I didn't know if you
Well,
Chase Hughes has a behavioral table of elements. I don't know if you'd ever seen that, but there is one out there. So I'll have to share it with you sometime to look at. It's that basic principle where these behaviors, if you add them together, blah, 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 is a score. And if it's above a certain number, it bears looking into. It doesn't say definitively that it's deception, just that there could be something there. Keep asking questions.
Is there research on that scale? Do you know?
I do not. I don't know. I believe he has a PhD himself, but like I said, I'll happily share it. I can also connect you.
Okay. But that would be, that's a step forward. Because then it becomes far more standardized. That means that different people will do the same and look for the same. And that's a big step forward.
Okay, now On that note, there are different verbal, which you seem to definitely lean to what they say is more likely to tell you one way or the other versus nonverbal. One of these disciplines, I believe, statement analysis and scan. Do you consider them the same, or do you separate
I
them?
don't know. I know what scan is because there's research on scan. Scan is described in literature. I don't know about
Mhm.
statement analysis. My impression is that's very similar, but I don't know because there's no scientific
Okay.
writing about statement analysis.
I think they're the same in the sense that I believe the individual that trademarked statement analysis learned scan
Yeah, there
from
you go. So that's
Avinoam
similar.
Sapir.
And for example, one thing
Right.
they look at some of those scan criteria. I think make to honest very little sense. I think, but some okay, like self references, where the people use the word I and we, that kind of stuff. Okay, you can think truth tellers do that more than lie tellers, and because you own a statement or you don't, so that makes sense. But if you now look at the meta-analysis of that, and I just checked that one, that has a D score of 0.14. That is very low. So that means indeed the truth tellers will use the word I more than lie tellers do, but it's so tiny difference. If you rely on that, you make many mistakes. And there comes the confirmation bias in place in these people who use those kind of methods. Yeah, they use case studies. So they know, well, in this case, indeed, the lie teller avoided the word I. Yeah, you will find that. You will find it. But you also will find many lie tellers who do use the word I. And you will find many truth tellers who don't use it. Truth tellers more than lie tellers, but all four categories are there. So if you just look for that specific cue, yeah, well, you will have many hits because many lie tellers will not use it. But it doesn't mean that it's a really good indicator for deception. Because for that you need to do systematic research. You need all kind of statement. Then have a look, and then you will see the difference is far smaller than I guess those guys think it
Mhm.
is because they use case studies.
On that note, though, because I'm not an expert, I just talk to a lot and read it. Do they use that as the final determinant, or is it just one of
But that
many? And then when you add all the elements together, then they come to a possible conclusion
Well,
one
that
way or
will be
another.
good if they do that in scan, because some of the other verbal tools do that. So there you have 15 or
Mhm,
18 criteria, and you just look for the presence and absence of each of those 18, and you get a final score. That's
mhm,
not the case in scan. In scan, it's they don't make a total score at the end. It's even unclear how many criteria there are. Then, if you look at the literature, usually about 12. Some more people use 12, and maybe, but you don't get a score between 0 and 12. It really is in this statement, that's a lie because that was present or absent. In the other statement, it was a lie because that happened. And something completely different happens. And then you have the same problem again. It is not standardized. So that means that two experts will use completely different things. And you cannot predict beforehand what
mhm.
you're going to look for. And that is a real problem.
Okay, well, and that's interesting, and I wish Peter was here on some of this because I do know, like, for example, you mentioned the pronoun usage. One case that stands out in my mind of pronoun usage that would be a flag, if you will, in statement analysis is if I describe a
Yeah.
robbery or whatever, like somebody comes up to me and and I'm talking to them and we're talking, then they
Mhm.
pull out a gun, then they tell me to go to the safe, and we go to the safe. That would be a red flag in statement analysis because the
Mhm.
we shows a unity
Yeah,
with
yeah.
that person versus he took me
Yeah, yeah,
to the
yeah.
safe, which would
Yes.
show a distancing. And that's just one, example, because obviously it's a whole other spectrum that they would look into, like how much time is spent talking about that. Um, there's a depth of time to where if I talk like for a really long time about all the events leading up to it, and then I talk about the event itself, and I'm really short. I kind of short shrift it, and then I spend more time after. That would be another red flag that they would kind of add to the pile. Does that make sense in your research and
Not
study?
only mine research, by the way, but I look at all researchers what they find.
Oh, sorry.
No, that time element you have now, there's hardly any research in that. Certainly not. There's research in scan, not so much because it doesn't work. We didn't find anything with scan,
Okay.
and not only we. I know in Holland there's somebody did a PhD on that, found nothing in scan. We know Australia that there are a handful, maybe 10 studies in scan, and nobody finds anything. So that's it is popular, and the question is why? It's extremely popular. Maybe because it's made by a practitioner. Sapir is a practitioner, and all the other tools available are made by scientists, and that makes it different. And maybe practitioners like tools made by practitioners more, or it sounds via intuition or something. They think it is more valid. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. But of the tools out there, and about 6, 7, 8, scan is the worst. All the other tools work. All the verbal tools work, and they really are above the level of challenge for lie telling and truth telling. But scan, nobody found anything.
Okay. Well, on that note, I'm looking at your article that you sent me earlier, and there it looks like you're covering 3 overall tools: CBCA, RM, and what is that? Reality
RM's reality
monitoring.
monitoring, CBCA criteria-based content analysis. And then you also scan. That's
Right.
one part. Yes, one cluster of
Okay.
tools, of which RM and CBCA they do work. It's about 70%, maybe 75, something like that in accuracy rate. Huh? And scan doesn't get above chance in those studies. And for example, there's one study out in which statements of truth tellers and lie tellers, these are students, the statements are analyzed via scan and via RM. And RM did distinguish between the two, and scan did not. So there are verbal differences in those statements, but scan doesn't pick it up, and RM does.
Okay. Well, so what I wanted to ask is, can you go into what each tool is? We'll move beyond scan because I've got a lot, of people doing that. But like CBCA, can you describe what it is, how it works, and a basic breakdown, and where people can learn it? That'd be a good question
That's
too.
to answer the last question first. Where you can learn? That's a very good question. I don't know. I don't think there are courses out there for CBCA. CBCA is developed in Germany. I think there is a course in German. I'm not aware of any English speaking courses in CBCA. CBCA is a list of 18 criteria that they say truth tellers will report them more often than lie tellers. And it has a very basic one is detail. You get more details in truthful statements than in deceptive statements, and there are good reasons for that. It also has one that's called contextual embeddings. Contextual embeddings is if people mention times and locations when they talk about something. Lie tellers are very vaguer on that because the moment they start talking, make it very precise in terms of when things happened and where it was, they may fear to give the lie away. So they're far more vague in that. For example, what could be of course, a popular way of telling a lie is to tell something that you really have experienced, albeit not at the moment you claim you have experienced that. But that, of course, because then you can tell the truth. You talk about something you have experienced. It's easier. You have to lie about the timing when it happened. So lie tellers are vaguer in that kind of information about when things happened and where it happened, because that gives the lie away. So that's what CBCA looks at. It also looks at something that we ourselves look into more deeply now. Things are called complications. Complications are things that not necessarily, no, not always unexpected. Often they are, but not always. But that make the story more complicated. In a way, this interview is complicated in that you sent me earlier today an email saying we can't have this because something at the time because I'm in the UK, you in the US, and we didn't have So that's a complication. So you send me email, we can't do this interview. Then you send me an email 1 hour later, maybe you can do it. And then I have to go back to you, yes, we can do it. And Peter is not here. These are all complications. And complications are very often truthful. Truth tellers have more complications in the story than life. So that's also part of CBCA. And there are more of those criteria. There are 18, but it takes too long to explain them all. RM, reality monitoring, is based on the idea that if people talk about the true, real experience, they have perceived that because they've seen it, they've heard something, they've smelled something, they felt it. And you get it back in the story. So the story needs to have perceptual information. Information you can break down to what people could see, could hear, could smell, could feel. And you can code for that. Just details are these perceptual details. Truth tellers give you more perceptual details in the story than light tellers do. And again, also there the contextual embeddings about time and location. Truth tellers have them more than light tellers. And also RM looks at emotions. That's also scanned, by the way. Truth tellers include more their emotions, their feelings in the stories.
Question on that, though, would that not be relative to the person doing the questioning? And by that, I mean, if you just say, tell me what happened, how will the person not know to give more emotional information or not? Some people by nature are going to say A, B, C, D, E, and not necessarily be lying, just very straightforward, especially if they're of a like a military background or a police background or some sort of bureaucratic background. Just the facts, lay them out in a row. How do you get all this other rich information you're describing with the reality monitoring? Is there a
There are
methodology?
there's certainly interview techniques and tools to get people to talk. Also, truth tellers never tell you everything that's in their mind spontaneously. They never do. There are social rules for that. If you ask somebody, what did you do last night? If you get more than 8 or 10 words, they think this is a complete idiot because you don't expect that. You just expect a very short answer. Of course, people understand that in interview settings, you have to say more than a few words, but still, you don't really know how much. So the expectation is not high enough. Also, what you have, the truth tellers are very often unmotivated to say much because they very often think the truth will come out anyway. It is so obvious. I'm telling the truth. Why do I have to do this? And the third reason is that it's very difficult to get all your information out of your memory. So there are techniques, tools there to raise expectations, how much to say, to motivate people to say more, and to get to facilitate getting information out of your memory. And we know from research that those tools work better for truth tellers than for lie tellers. So if you use those tools, the truth tellers give you more, start adding more information to their stories than lie tellers do. And lie tellers don't do that often because for them, lie tellers often try to keep the story simple. That's a very basic strategy in lying. Keeping stories simple for different reasons. One reason is the more you say, the more likely it is that you give a lead away to investigators. The more information you give, so you don't do that. You don't want to give too much information. Lying is more difficult than truth telling. And how do you make it simpler by not saying much? The more you say, the more difficult the story will become. And the third is lie tellers are very keen on consistency. They think that I need to be consistent. I need to give you the same story again and again. So therefore, kind of tools that make truth tellers to give you more and more information in interview are not that effective in lie telling. And that's where you see the difference. So not so much at the beginning. The beginning, indeed, you may not get much information, but the more these tools you use, the truth teller will now indeed start adding information to their stories.
Question on that, though, and I have a strange brain, but I can't help but have something pop into my head thinking about repressed memories and false confessions that have
Yeah.
come out from people because the questioner, I don't know the best way to put this, can imply what they sort of desire
Yeah.
to hear. Is this something that you have factored in? Because, you know, a truth teller will keep giving you more and more details, but then somebody who's trying to please an interviewer, could they not do the same thing and wind up talking themselves into something they didn't even do?
What you're talking about are specific interview styles and techniques. For example, the read technique is one of them that can lead to all kind of false confessions. But in verbal lie detection, leading questions are not at all asked. It's very often just one open question. Tell me all you want to say. Tell me all you remember what happened last night. That's just a question. And if you don't get much information, then, for example, you could do is say, okay, we would like you to tell you more. Maybe you can remember more. Listen to this. And now you let them listen to a detailed answer about something else. Because sometimes people don't know how detailed an answer looks like. So now you let them listen to an audio tape of a rather detailed response. And then say, okay, keep now that amount of detail in mind. Please tell me again. What do you remember that happened last night? So there are no leading questions. It's only that question. Tell me what happened. And even if the person says, okay, I did ABC, don't ask any specific questions about ABC. Just ask the question, okay, tell me more detail what happened.
Okay, so just so I get it right, and I feel like there's really some nuance here, and I definitely want to catch it all. You would say, possibly, so tell me what happened last night, and then they tell you whatever as they come out. And you'd be like, is there anything else? Is that
not
nothing
anything
else
No.
that?
Then you say, okay, thank you for this. I would like you to ask the question again. Tell me all that you remember that happened last night. But before I ask you to tell me that story again, listen to this. And this is the amount of detail, the number of details that we ideally, if you remember that, would like to give.
Now, would that be somebody else giving a statement that you'd be playing them that had no relative information tied to the current one, or would it just be like a detailed breakdown of
no, that's indeed, we have a standard tape for that. Has nothing to do with the topic they're talking about, because what you want to tell interviewees, we would like you to give you more information, and we don't want to coach them what type of information to give. So the idea they should get, okay, you want more information, and not what type of information.
Without spoiling anything, what would be an example detailed statement that I might hear? Would it be somebody describing a soccer game or something not relevant, to whatever I'm doing? They're just describing something else.
Our tape is about a Formula 2 motor racing. Somebody went to Formula 2 motor racing and talks about the beginning of that motor race, that he went on because he knows one of those drivers. So went on the pitch and saw, well, whatever you saw there on the pitch. It's very short. It's 1 minute or something like that, because that already we know from research gives people the idea how much information to give. Because what we normally ask, and normally ask in interviews, is, okay, try to give me all details you remember. If you do it very complete, even how non-significant they may seem, something like that. But the problem of that is it's an instruction. There's a statement is an example, and examples are easier to follow than instructions. I don't know about you, but I have to, I don't know, there's an exercise bike here behind me, for example. Well, if I have to set up that exercise bike, I can read the instructions, but I'm not good at that. I prefer to look at the YouTube film how to do it. And most people have that. YouTube are examples. Manuals are instructions. And for many people, are examples easier to follow.
No, that makes sense, but I'd always also worry about the whole mirroring. Like, oh, do they mean that I talked to somebody, or I was supposed to talk to somebody?
Yeah.
People can get confused.
But there's a lot of research in that model statement at the moment. That research, and showing indeed it leads to more information. It leads to more information than just a question to be detailed. With research, it doesn't lead to more inaccurate. So truth tellers give you more information, and the same percentage of what they say is accurate. So these are well-tested methods.
Okay, and now this is reality monitoring that we've been discussing this whole time.
No, there's a mixture of two. Reality monitoring is because you asked a question about something else. RM is indeed what kind of details you look for. That is, but now with the model statement is part of that's called CCA. But what you need to do in these, usually the first statement people give is not detailed enough. We know from research at the first statement, lie tellers and
Mhm.
truth tellers don't make much difference. What a truth teller
Mhm.
spontaneous says, and typically what a lie teller has prepared, is very little difference. So you need to make those difference more larger, and for that you use methods like CCA. Cognitive credibility assessment is one of them, and the model statement is part of CCA. You look indeed
Okay.
for the RM type of details. You look for perceptual information. You look for contextual information, location, space. You look for complications. Complications are a very good one to use and in those interview settings.
I don't remember if it was you or someone else, but are other methodologies to ask them to go in
Yeah, reverse.
reverse, or what
Yeah,
happened before that, or what
yeah,
happened before that, or
yeah.
what happened
That's
before
our
that?
research. That also leads, at least in true tellers, uh, to more information, more than in lie tellers. It's difficult for true tellers as well. So if you just ask, okay, tell me the story, what happened last night, everybody will do that in normal order. And then say, okay, start now at the end. You went to bed just before that. You will see that everybody gives you less information because far more difficult to do. But you very often see that truth tellers will add new information because they will think about the event again from a different perspective. And that leads to new information. It leads to new memories. And they will tell that far more than
Mhm.
lie tellers who like to be consistent. So lie tellers often think, well, okay, I told you that story from A to Z. I now need to do the other way around. Maybe it's a trick. Maybe you want to know whether I can also tell my story in reverse order. And the idea of adding new information is very often not in the mind of lie tellers.
Question on that too, because I'm a space cadet. I sometimes will get mixed up even when I'm telling the truth. Does that happen? And is there any kind of gauge for that? Like if they're going backwards, they're going, okay, well, I just, oh wait, no, I had to be this
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I did that. Um, is that something that you
Well, that is
account for?
called, what you just do is called a spontaneous correction. Spontaneous correction is
Hmm.
not part of that CBCA, the criteria-based content analysis. One of those 18 criteria is spontaneous corrections. Spontaneous corrections are more likely to be truthful, unprompted. Eh? So in you have a recall and you start correcting yourself in that recall without any questioning. That's spontaneous corrections, more often to be truthful. Um, yeah, but what we do for, we typically only look for new information people give. We don't look at what people
Hmm.
omit. Contradictions can be indicative, but not always. It depends a bit on what type of contradictions there are. The best criterion is new information people give. Just focus.
Okay. Now, when you're practicing and questioning, um, is this an interrogation method, or what would you call that? And I know that in a lot of interrogation methods, it's recommended that they're not confrontational, that they're more of an ally to whomever they're speaking to. If it's us against all these
Mhm.
people out here, well, they don't believe you, or they do this, they do that, or what would you say if this is? Does any of that come in, or am I making any sense at all? I'm wondering what is the attitude of the questioner and how they would
Very
go
friendly.
about it.
So indeed, it's certainly not accusatory, confrontational. Absolutely not. It's far more information gathering. The reason for that is that if you want a truth teller to give you information, the person needs to feel comfortable and needs to feel relaxed and needs to think the person is interested in what they tell. Otherwise, they won't tell you much.
Mhm.
So if you are now like that, a very friendly interviewer, and indeed gives the impression that you listen to the best stories you've ever heard in your life, that will encourage truth tellers to give you more information. And that will enhance differences because lie tellers stay constant because they want to be consistent and so forth. They don't want to give more information. So all this friendly approach makes truth tellers to say more, not lie tellers. So therefore the difference become more pronounced.
Okay, and the stance of the questioner. This might sound ridiculous, but I think mindset
Mhm.
is relevant. Should they go in there with the attitude of, I'm going to believe everything they tell me? I just want to get all the information that I can from that person, everything, every word out of them. It's not up to me to judge what they're saying. It's just up to me to collect it versus get a confession type of thing.
You need to start with getting as much information as possible. Absolutely, as much information. And then you can start confronting the person with what they said. Ideally, with evidence you have, or you can now collect. If people give you information, the analysts in interviews, you say something, they can check indeed what you say. And then you can confront, say, okay, you told us A, but how then do you explain this? And what you have is evidence that contradicts what people are saying. So the order is that let people talk first, and then say, okay, this contradicts the evidence. Don't say to people, okay, this is the evidence we have, explain that to me. That's happening on TV. That's not a good way for lie detection. Why not? Because that gives now the lie teller the opportunity to give a truthful alibi, truthful story about that evidence. We know, for example, not only do lie tellers keep stories simple, they also try to avoid incriminating evidence. So when people want to hide some things they've done during a day, they very often don't want to put themselves at all, even at a location. I think that's close. So they will give another story. They may have broken to a shop in a shopping mall, but they very rarely volunteer they were in a shopping mall. So they won't say that. So if you now really let them in detail tell what they have done that day, and then if they've done the whole story, and then say, okay, but here we have CCTV. You were in that shopping mall. How do you explain that? That's the confrontational stuff. That works. That's also confrontation, but not the confrontational saying at the beginning, "I think you're lying," uh, and so forth. That is just that doesn't work at all.
Don't
No.
pound the table.
Yes, be friendly.
What about the interrogator themselves? Should they lie? Should they not? Because using the example there, you may not have the information that they actually were at that location, but some interrogators will say, what if I told you that somebody saw you at
Yeah.
that location? Is that something that would be worked into that methodology, or is that just
That
terrible
is
idea?
that's very much an American idea. In the Western world, you're not allowed to lie to suspects in police interviews, at least. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yes, yes.
In the US, you are,
They are.
but not in the UK, for example. Not in Holland, you're not allowed to lie to suspects at all. So making evidence is absolutely it is. If you start doing that, the confession, whatever you get, will be thrown out of court. It's illegal to do so. So that's more an American question than a European question. Also, in intelligence, it's far better to have a trustworthy impression. And you can detect lies in that way. You don't need all these kind of tricks. It's a myth that you need all those tricks to detect lies. It absolutely is a myth.
Okay, well, I'm glad
Yeah,
I
there's a
asked that
question.
because not many people know that there are different, laws and standards between
Because
the
there's a
countries.
lot of research now into that. Traditionally, it was confrontational type of interviewing, also in the UK, for example, in
Mhm.
Western Europe, and not anymore. Due to in the UK, for example, it changed due to false confessions from IRA terrorists. So these IRA attacks in the 70s or 80s in the UK, that led to all kind of convictions of people who we knew later were innocent, false confession. And that was a real problem. That was indeed all the trickery, everything was used well in the UK. And that was a problem. Because now you have these high profile cases, the terrorist cases, that went completely and utterly wrong. So then in the UK, they decided late 80s, okay, we just abandon it. We make it illegal to
Mhm.
lie, illegal to use all kinds of tricks. And interestingly, the idea is you don't get confessions anymore. It's not true. It's absolutely not true. If you're friendly and so forth, you get the same amount, even more, often true confessions and indeed fewer false confessions. And you get more information. Again, the meta-analysis on that, on the confrontational stuff versus information gathering. Information gathering gives you more accurate information, more true confessions, fewer false confessions. And that is not my research, it's meta-analysis of all people research in the world on
Mhm.
that. The idea you have to be confrontational and so forth, pressure on the suspect, is a myth.
On that note, is patience a factor? And I don't mean to the point where you just, keep them up for 3 days, because that would fall under torture. I mean, just literally, you talk to, interrogator will talk to him for a while, and then may just come back and just keep revisiting. And it may take days or even weeks of just continuously covering the same ground. Is that an acceptable approach?
It doesn't have to take that long to get people to talk. The patience certainly is an issue. I was myself involved in a Dutch case in which a woman, rather young, she was a suspect of having stabbed her own children to death, which she denied and said, no. What happened is that she went out. She got hungry, went out, tried to get some food. Never happened because a stranger on the street came to her, threatened her. She went back home, and now the stranger knocked at the door, came in, got a knife, stabbed children to death. And now she fought, get a knife, and he ran out. But that is not a plausible story, to be very honest. And that after 2 or 3 minutes, by saying that, the police started saying, "We don't believe you." And that I understand why they thought that, because I also thought this is not plausible. But that was the end of the whole thing, because now the woman will say, "Well, okay, you don't believe me. What are we doing here? This will happen. You don't believe me," and it became a very difficult interview setting. So that indeed the patients, far better is let them talk more, let them discuss more. And indeed, for example, there was evidence. There was evidence that she did not leave her house, for example, at the evening. So discuss more about what happened really on the street and so forth. Get her to talk.
Okay, and then the person. So I guess you could say. So what were they wearing? How tall were they? Were they taller than you? Shorter than you? Those
Yeah,
kinds of questions, or no?
no,
Don't
go
even go
there.
there.
Just say, okay, visualize, try to remember there on the street, focus yourself, being on the street, visualize situation there outside, it's outside our own house, what it looks like and so forth. Have you that in mind, and now describe again what you could see. That's a better one. So keep it completely open.
That you have to practice to train on, don't you? To learn the mentality
Yeah,
of not filling in, because you are kind of
yeah,
trying to
yeah. You
ascertain
need to be trained
details.
there. Yeah.
Well, and that is my next question. Like you mentioned the CBCA or whatever, that's only a German thing. Where can someone learn the reality monitoring
Yeah,
combined with
that's a very good question, because
application?
there's not much research, there's not much training out there. The problem is these
Mhm.
methods are developed by academics, scientists. They are like me. Our job is to do research and teach. That's our paid for, and not to give training. So we do every now and then give training, but very very occasionally, and others as well. We are not full time trainers. So the next step is indeed is to get the stuff that scientists, academics have developed, to get it out in the world in training programs. Well, then that is needed. We know ourselves that's needed, and it's not really the case at the moment. So there is training, but very very rare. Certainly not commercial. There are no websites sign up for the training. It doesn't exist.
Mhm. So that would, in of itself, force people to use what training is
That's
available,
that's
which you may
exactly
not
the
like.
point. You're absolutely right. That's indeed why you have scan trainings all over the world. Why you have the microexpressions, that's all over the world. That kind of stuff indeed, because that's available. Yeah. But we are, at least in the US as well, it is changing, because now it becomes far more science-based interrogation, science-based. That is the new, for example, California. I was there last week at a district attorney had organized a session there about science-based. They try to get rid of everything that is not science-based. And that means the end of the read technique. It means the end of scan, because those techniques are not science-based. So what I think the issue is that, of course, you can all kind of people fine with me if they still give scan consultancy and so forth. I think more the issue is, do you now train people those kind of techniques? And my view on that is we shouldn't. My view is police schools, intelligence agencies should not train people in the inbound, in the read technique, in scan, and so forth. But of course, it's not up to me. But that's my view, how it should become, and it is getting into that direction, which is, I think, a very good step.
Okay, but not to be dumb again, are they developing science-based training specifically that can be trained? Because you do have a giant problem
Yeah, but
there. It's like, oh, I hate everything that's out there. Okay, well, give me another
there
option.
are certainly there is training, even the US as well. There is
Okay.
training. There's FBI has training in science-based interrogation interviewing. Yes,
Mhm.
yeah. It is under
Okay.
development, but indeed it's that takes time, because first you need to establish methods that work. Say 15 years ago, there was hardly anything. So now we are at the stage, indeed, we know there's several tools. We can indeed, because we know they work to some extent. So now indeed the next step will be to get that trained. But that's not easy. Then, for example, we have programs, train the trainer, so it's called. And that is very difficult. We did ourselves research on it very, very hard. We give ourselves training in lie detection, but that's to get somebody else to give our training. That was far more difficult to achieve than we thought it would be, because it makes you aware. Because it's somebody got the PowerPoint, for example, presentation. Okay, somebody can practice that, but it's so far more other knowledge is there. Is hidden knowledge that we have, and it's not in the PowerPoint that you really need to make techniques people aware how technique works. There's a lot of knowledge need to do those trainings, but that is definitely that's
But that would be any training, though. I technically speaking, that would be any discipline,
yes.
any training, even your PhD. I'm guessing that if you look back to right after you got that, you're clueless. You were clueless then compared
Yeah,
to
well,
what
yeah.
you are now, just because of all the years and experience. And I mean, you have to have a baseline of knowledge, and then hopefully that readies you to gain more as you go. So, like tools in order to help you learn as you
But we
experience,
underestimated
if
how
that
much
makes
we in
sense.
fact knew. Let's say like that. We thought it was easier to get somebody else to give the training than it was. Yeah, but that of course is that's the way forward. Yeah, that you get to train other trainers.
Interesting. Well, and some of it, I guess, is if the materials that are produced on it, this is very scientific, very dry. Do you have people who are working on more
No, that's
accessible, popular, or easier to read
yeah.
versions of
Those
this?
trainings are not dry, and not, of course, the articles are very dry. Indeed, they're very much, but the trainings are not. No, there are no. Training very often is what academics, of course, do, what scientists do, is to give evidence that something works, give evidence studies, and that in training you leave that out. You just say, okay, it works, we know it works, and you explain how to use it, and you let people do exercises with it. That's what we do. You get all kind of strangers come in who then either lie, tell the truth, or whatever they do, and we yeah, predict beforehand, okay, that will happen. This is what the person probably will go to say. If the person says this and this and this, likely be true. Does it do that? Likely to be a lie, and so forth. Then that's so all kind of exercises.
Well, like a recertification type of thing too, is of use. First, get the knowledge, then revisit it every so often, so that way you don't lose the basic principles, because that's very condensed what you're describing. Um, Here's an off the wall question: what have you discovered that you had wrong many years ago?
Yeah, there must be. Of course, and I started with non-verbal behaviors. I was far more,
Hmm.
uh, I thought it would work. I'm far more skeptical about non-verbal lie detection now than I was in the past. Um,
Hmm.
Verbal lie detection as well, and I was more that CBCA. I was more a fan of it then than I'm now, because it's very difficult. Is it? I think there are easier methods to analyze a statement then via CBCA. So that, and I changed my mind on that. Some other things as well. For example, the model statement, as I just described, that audio tape. When we started that, we thought you would see that the truth tellers give you more additional information than lie tellers do via the model statement. We don't find that. We find also lie tellers give you more information. It's more the type of information they give is different, but because for them it's also so obvious, they have to tell you more. They will tell you more. So that is something. For example, we have changed our mind on that, and also the reasons why we find the difference we found. We started saying the differences between lie tellers and truth tellers are because lying is more difficult than truth telling. That is still part of what we think, but not anymore that. There are far more other reasons why, and maybe even more important reasons why the difference emerged. So the whole idea behind has changed. So there are quite a few.
Okay.
There are quite a few differences.
This one is probably from left field, but I would think that it would be a buzz term even in your field. Artificial intelligence. Do you see that coming into any of this?
I don't know. It's certainly an issue that needs to be researched. It definitely needs to be researched. But I don't know. I don't know. It's an empirical question. I'm afraid of it, to be very honest. But it's
well, it's frightening and fascinating all at one time.
And of course, if you work at universities, it's also an issue for students who write essays and coursework.
Well, but then again, you can always use your other skill to say, did you write it? Did you really do it?
Yeah, but we don't interview people. Huh? We just mark the essays they've written.
Fair enough. Okay, to close out, my last question is an odd one, but what is the one question that I should have asked you, but I neglected to?
I don't know. I don't know. That's up to you. I don't know.
Okay. Is there any question out there that you wish somebody would ask you that nobody seems to?
No, not really. It's more hopefully the message is clear that we need science-based interviewing, interrogation, lie detection. Then that's my method. That's my advice. And all other kind of things need via the confirmation bias, whatever you look for, you will find evidence for that. So all these people say, well, I look for this, and this is a case study. I can tell you exactly it happened. Yeah, of course. That tells you absolutely nothing at all. And the problem is that if the whole read technique, for example, is developed, of course, by Reed and Inbau in that time, these are practitioners who say, well, we've interviewed so many people, we know exactly how they behave when they lie. They don't. They didn't, because there's no systematic research. And that's a big problem. If you don't do research, you will not find, you won't know. And sometimes you will see it's for example, the self-references, I and so forth. And many academics also thought that is a strong indicator. But only by doing research, you see it's not. And only via research, people realize it's a far weaker indicator than we thought it would be. And you only find it out by doing research.
All right. Well, sir, I hope we don't have to wait multiple years to talk.
That's up to you. You didn't invite me.
You're always welcome, and thank you so much. I will try to get the interview set up with Peter Hyatt or somebody else on that. Maybe a nonverbal. We can have a showdown. Who knows? But it could be a lot of fun. But
thank you very much,
sir.